Welcome to another episode of the ACA podcast, where we talk to people in business and technology and, well, anyone we find interesting. I'm John McFarlane, co-founder of ACA Engine, and in this episode I talk to Chris Bottger from Cisco Collaboration on all things workplace and smart building. So this one runs slightly long, but if smart buildings and connected workplaces are your thing, Chris shares many great insights, so stick with it. If your attention span needs something a little bit more digestible, we always release snippets and highlights on our LinkedIn page. Just search for ACA Engine on the company page section of LinkedIn, or you can always find our other episodes and a lot of information and content at acaengine.com. Okay, just straight to the interview between Chris and I. I just realized I've only met you in person that one time in New York, right? And recently you invited me to Texas, and I flew all the way to the other side of the world, and you weren't even there. So I'm like, oh, thanks for the invite. Oh, but you're not here. So we've only met in person that one time, but we're often on calls early in the morning. Let's start with a question, quite a simple one. What made you jump the fence from system integrator who sort of works with products to a vendor at Cisco who has the products?
Yeah, maybe it's good to give a little bit of context to that. So originally, I started off in building management systems, energy management systems, in particular with a company it's now being acquired by Schneider Electric. And then about 22 years ago, I actually went to Picturetel, who was the video conferencing company of the late 80s and 90s, and then got acquired by Polycom. And then after that, I actually went into the channel for 17 years. So I had both the manufacturing side as well as the channel side. The pace of innovation currently was moving so rapidly that I think it's a case of, I was super excited to be able to have the opportunity for this particular role at Cisco, knowing that some of the innovations that are associated to this and these smart buildings and how video collaboration devices can be so integral in that to drive user behavior, that I realized that's where I can get the most acceleration and make these things happen the most quickly. And you and I saw that, in our previous where we sort of met, that it's sometimes slow from a channel perspective to do that. And I want to be able to drive those channels as well, multiple ones, to get that acceleration in there, because I think it's going to have a huge effect to the way that people can work inside of a building and the way that it can actually drive engagement inside of a building as well.
What I'm sort of seeing between the vendors and service providers or system integrators is that there's sort of a blurred line now where even most vendors are offering services, and just in general a smart building or a collaborative workplace is quite a complicated thing. So you can't really be isolated as here's the product we do as a vendor. You sort of accidentally or maybe purposefully get pulled into providing services regardless. So I think anyone that has a SI or service background probably makes a pretty good vendor, because they understand how everything comes together, and that's all the way through, I think, from sales, which today sales sort of plays a key role in helping a project have the right gear and the right stuff and the right user experience, all the way through to supporting the products as a vendor. So I think your career progression and sort of jumping between services and product over your career makes you accidentally perfect for what you're doing now in working with clients and partners to sort of drive innovation in smart workplace in particular.
Yeah, and it's one of the things. One of the things when I left Picturetel was really that the product at that stage was already really, really good. But to make it work, you really wanted a good service and a managed service around that as well. So you're right. Then my career really was there on the managed services side more than anything, and knowing that's the glue in the middle that makes it all work. And where I find there's Obviously, Cisco has a tremendous channel partner, worldwide channel partners that are there, and many of them have their own platform. Some of them use that just to manage IT managed services. Some of them use it just for video collaboration managed services. So there's a great opportunity for both to take on both sides of that, because you need all of it from a networking perspective, from a device perspective, and everything else in between, to then be able to add real value. And I think for the channels, because part of the challenge in this industry has been, people just say, oh, I need video conferencing, check, and don't take into account the experience aspect of that. Don't take into account how you can drive that experience for engaging users. It doesn't cross their mind. And when you have that all integrated, a partner can deliver that into the different environments that a customer has, because not every customer is going to have the same building management system, and you guys know that. That's why you have your platform, because it can adapt to all the different elements that a customer may have that you need to integrate, where they may use different vendors themselves for their catering, for their parking, for any of those aspects.
Do you think there's any gaps in service providers? So as Cisco, you're working with a number of partners, very well established partner network at Cisco. When it comes to smart workplace, though, that's a lot of it's so new and the concepts are new, and I think the workplaces themselves are driving it. So like the large, in our experience, it's like the large business consulting firms, accounting firms. They're really innovative compared to to a lot of the providers. Are you finding there's gaps, and do you see those gaps closing, or are there still challenges to sell everything, your vision, which I think we'll go over in a bit more detail, but your vision for a smart and connected workplace? Is it achievable with the current set of sort of partners and the stock standard system integrators out there?
So to answer your first question, yes, there are absolutely gaps, and I absolutely see that. Yes, but I think what you're seeing in the partner community as well is that they also realize a lot of value can be achieved through API integrations, through giving customers environments that work inside of their workflow, as opposed to just giving them tools and saying, here's a piece of technology, you figure out how to use it, and we're just going to sell the technology. So, and I'll give you a specific example of that. So, you obviously Cisco has a really breadth of different types of partners. You have the IT integrators as one sort of community. You have the traditional telco service provider type partners as another community, and then you have sort of the VARs in the middle, so the AV type of integrators as well, sitting sort of in the middle there. So on the AV side, it's when you step back and you look at what those partners do. I already gave an example earlier on, is where quite a few of the more of the AV type companies that do video managed services do it just for video. They don't touch network, they don't touch data center, they don't touch IoT, they don't touch security. And then you have the IT integrators that don't touch video and don't touch collab, but they touch all the other pieces. So if you now take it from an IT integrator and you say, okay, well now as part of that building, it's going to expose you potentially to be able to do the video collaboration piece as well, because that's the interface back to the user, and with that you can actually drive user behavior in there as well. And we'll probably talk about some of examples of that. But typically there were barriers to entry for them. And two major ones. One was they would have to buy an MCU, a bridge, in order to be able to manage video calls. And then secondly is they would have to hire conference producers that would manage the calls on those bridge. Both big barriers to entries. If you now look at the Cisco WebEx devices, they have voice assistant built in called WebEx Assistant. And over time, we'll have APIs going into those as well, where you can control, what comes in and out from a voice perspective. And because WebEx itself has APIs, if I'm in a meeting, I can now control WebEx itself. So now you have the opportunity to offer virtual conference producer, where I'm taking hey, add me this site, hey, drop so-and-so, connect so-and-so, mute this site, unmute this site. All those sort of things that you would get with a human concierge service, you could now get through a virtual concierge service.
Yep.
So now those IT integrators have two barriers: not needing to buy the bridge, and then not having to hire a whole bunch of conference producers to manage that. So that would give them an incentive to be able to jump onto that side of the wagon.
Yep.
Likewise, in reverse, on the sort of more traditional AV reseller and integrator and managed service providers, they now, with AV moving more and more over to IP and more over to IoT. And again, you guys at ACA have been sort of at the center of some of those things. And one of the things when you and I first met that really got me excited was the ability that you were already managing the AV in thousands of conference rooms, all on a single server, without having to have dedicated controllers in there and racks and cabling and proprietary stuff. So now you have an opportunity for the AV reseller to say, hey, can I help migrate some of my business to sort of supplement it with also doing sort of virtualized AV, where I can use IoT devices and AV over IP without having the cost of the controller, and more importantly, the racking and the stacking and all of the other things and the proprietary control programs that go with that. So I think what's fascinating is...
AV is interesting. Let me just comment on that before we move beyond it. So at ACA, we definitely started with audio-visual. Today, though, it's not in many of our projects at all. So, but what's consistent is the concept's the same. So instead of connecting to a audio DSP, a video switch, a TV, and controlling those devices, we're now connecting to a lot of Cisco gear, Wi-Fi to do triangulation of people, desk sensors, building access control. Our platform hasn't changed to achieve that. It's just we shifted our focus to this more general smart building IoT without having to make any changes and realizing, oh, we're accidentally sort of experts in this area. And I think audiovisual technologists and companies in general could make that transition very easily for the same reasons. But a lot of them are not thinking that way. They're sort of only looking at the tech in a meeting room and trying to have sort of products live longer than they really need to, instead of saying, well, how do we, everything we've learned, everything we know, how do we apply this to the building? Because we're in the best position to be an IoT integrator, not an AV integrator. I think that's the transition some companies are making, but very few in my experience. But I think more will get there eventually.
So I'll give you the history lesson that's associated to that I typically say to those partners where they want to focus on what they've known. If you go back exactly 10 years ago, Cisco hadn't acquired Tandberg at that stage, and the big IT integrators didn't do video conferencing. Even though you already had video over IP since the early 2000s, when it was 323 protocols and what have you. But today, the IT integrators sell more video devices than the AV integrators, who traditionally have been on that video side. Why? Because when Cisco acquired Tandberg, it basically ratified and said, hey, IT integrators, these are just IP devices, like anything else. So the IT integrators then turned around and said, okay, well, if it's just an IP device, that's what we do. That's our business. That's what we do. So then you saw them buying and attaching video devices like crazy, and they went exponential. So now you've got to ask yourself the same question 10 years later and say, if the AV components getting more and more IP connected, becoming more and more IoT, do you think this time round the IT integrators are going to turn around and say, oh, you know what? No, now that it's IP, but if it's still AV, we'll leave that for the AV integrators to go and do that. I think that's the risk that the AV integrator has to look at, that when the racks and the dedicated controllers and the proprietary standards get moved over to IoT and IP, it opens up for the IT integrators to say, This is just software now. That's what we do. We build software control and what have you. That's what we do. So I think there's a significant risk there. You're absolutely right. Many AV integrators won't make that transition quick enough.
Yeah.
But there'll be many that will figure that out and go, wow, we need to be in that. And the beauty of it is it is not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
So it's not suddenly going to be a flip the switch change. So in essence, what I'm saying to the AV partners is you can migrate your business. And because guess what? If you've got a dedicated programmer for AV programming, they can program. They can do that same programming with RESTful APIs and what have you. So they fundamentally know how to program. It's just a different language they need to use. And many of them can use those languages already today.
It's an easier language. So if they're programming in these traditional AV control and those sort of products, that's no one really teaches that programming language anymore. But so there's not many examples except those things. If you get into the open API world, you can trial and error, just learn from the documentation. So I think that, there's probably fear of the unknown, and a lot of them haven't moved into that area because they don't know, or they might not even know that there's opportunities here. But it's also like a double-edged sword, I'm saying, where the ones that aren't slowly moving, and I agree, it won't happen, it doesn't change that quickly. I mean, we do have projects where that sort of risk has already happened, where some non-AV company just took care of the AV because they were already doing, the network and other components. And for us at ACA, that was an easier sort of partner to work with than a lot of the audiovisual companies, because they weren't blockers. They weren't trying to stop something from happening so what they normally do can happen. And this is where my company has to tread very carefully, because some of these big system integrators see us as a threat because we do things that are in their world, but we don't look to that world. We're looking to the much broader smart building, and we, to be frank, don't care about the meeting room technology. All we care about is, can it integrate with everything else we do so we can have a seamless user experience.
Yep.
Let me touch on sort of a new subject. We already sort of went over some of the gaps in providing all of this as a service. And you mentioned how the user experience gap is starting to improve because of things like voice control built into WebEx. That's really interesting to me, because a lot of my messaging and a lot of my articles, I'm constantly writing about how the future of the interface is no interface. No, like just walk into a space and it should work. If we can achieve passive interaction, or interaction, I should say, that's what we should do. And it's also one of the biggest gaps from the standard IT or AV or even BMS company we work with. User experience is not their strong suit, and we're finding that we have to partner with like another company to fill that gap. So like a creative agency that builds web apps and interfaces, and they do a great job at that, but they only go as far as the interface. Then we need someone else to do the integration. That's the gap. That's our challenge currently. But that sort of goes away when we don't need the interface at all, and we can just depend on two things Cisco can do for us. Cisco DNA Spaces, Cisco Meraki, we can track people and then trigger actions based on that user profile. So there's no need to open an app and touch things. So there's no need to get an app developer to build something. And then when you get into the space, there's obviously all the additional Cisco integrations, and voice is very interesting to me. And I only started experiencing it at the recent Cisco hackathon that you invited me to in Texas, in Dallas. And to see how easy it was for all of these programmers to just program their own commands. So you don't have to use like all the off-the-shelf commands that come with it. You can make your own, listen out for keywords and trigger actions externally from the Cisco ecosystem. So that's a really strong move to sort of to break it out of an ecosystem. And a lot of vendors don't allow you to do that. They might have features that allow you to do cool stuff as long as you have all their other products. But now we can take this and do almost anything we want, including monitoring anything in the building. So with ACA engine integrations, Cisco, WebEx with the voice, and maybe perhaps a Schneider integration, we can control the whole building with voice, not just the meeting. And people might get confused, like it's sort of under the WebEx category. It doesn't have to be anything to do with video conferencing or video collaboration. Am I correct in that? Yeah.
Yeah. So the analogy that I typically give is the iPhone analogy. It's a great phone, but it does so much more because of the applications that you can write to it. So it can be my emergency device. If there's an issue going on here at the state level or the town level or the federal level, I get emergency notifications coming through there as well. I can use it as a phone normally, but then it has other aspects. That hasn't really happened inside of the video world. So people still see video conferencing systems as video conferencing systems. And what they really are smart collaboration devices. And you gave some examples there. One of them being very, very open. And one of the things that you hacked on as well was simple little things like saying to the system, what's a smart collaboration device in that room, hey, I'm chilly. It recognizes that. It knows it's associated. It can understand. Cisco did a number of acquisitions over the last couple of years related around voice. One of them with MindMeld is specifically around context. So it can understand context. So when you say, I'm chilly, and I know you guys did that specifically, that one, it realizes that, hey, that context is related to how that person is feeling, and it's related to the fact that they want the temperature to be higher in that space. Let me go and tell the building management system to go and increase the temperature in that space.
Yeah.
So it's not just about being able to transcribe a voice, but it's also about understanding the context so that different people can say different things. They could say, hey, I'm chilly. They could say, I'm cold. They could say, could you increase the temperature? Those things we take for granted as human beings, knowing what they mean, but you need to have an engine that can build context around that.
Yep.
And that's really what we've built. And then in terms of, like you said, having no user interface as being the best user interface, and this is already you can do today, if I walk into a Cisco room that has a Cisco WebEx device in there, it can recognize who I am, and it can launch my meeting for me and can ask me that as well before it does it. So the problem that you often have with Alexa and some of these others is you always have to instigate it. The human has to instigate it.
Yeah.
But if I walk into a Cisco room and it recognizes who it is and says, hey, Chris, I recognize you've got a meeting in 10 minutes. Would you like me to launch that for you now? Or would you like me to call in at the exact time? Or would you like me to remind you at that time?
Yep.
So then it's interfacing. It's interfacing with me.
I think the key there, and the summary really, is if you have context-aware systems, we can move away from the traditional graphical user interface, and that takes away a huge dependency on some of the existing channel partners if they can just train the context rather than build interface through admin tools rather than having to code or design. Design's the hardest part, actually. Like when you have to design a user interface, that's weeks or months of workshopping, etc. Yep. It's a long process, and something, if we can avoid that, plus have a better experience as the result of that, that's really interesting. I think with Cisco in particular, the reason ACA, it sort of clicked with us recently, and if you look at any of our content, we're very pro Cisco, and I guess for everyone listening to this podcast to sort of emphasize, we don't really have a commercial relationship between Cisco and ACA. It's purely that we're selfish in what we recommend because we recommend things that work well for us. And if that's our aim at ACA, to find context-aware systems, Cisco gives us a number of things that can go further than what we can imagine right now, because we can start cross-referencing multiple context-aware systems. So within the Cisco ecosystem, so tracking people with Wi-Fi products and network products, to facial recognition built into the upcoming WebEx products, and everything in between is sort of giving us multiple sort of cross-reference points for people, so their location. And when you match people to location, we can start programming or teaching the system the context. So if a person is at a desk, trigger an action. If a person's in a lobby, if a person's in a cafe, if a person's commuting to work. So all of these things can just trigger the appropriate context-based interface. And here's another thing to sort of touch on, the replacing, you still need visual feedback in some user scenarios. So when I say we want to replace the app, there's still opportunities to have visual feedback. And for me, I think that's more in collaboration environments. So there's now card-style interfaces which allow you to do like quick responses, so buttons that pop up based on context that are completely programmable. So you can have a card-style interface in WebEx Teams, for example, but in also the other collaboration platforms, Slack, etc. I think that's the new environment, particularly in workplace, that the customer lives in. They're already in that environment. So let's make any visual feedback, any message they need to know happen there, rather than in another interface they have to load and log into.
Absolutely. And I think there's two fundamentals to the whole premise of what you just discussed there. One is, from your perspective, from an ACA engine perspective, it's all about being a platform, and it's all about being open to connect into, because you can't, every building is different, so you need to be open. And we're on that same side from a Cisco perspective. It's all about being open, whether it's the device in the room that's an open device, whether it's the network that's open that you can integrate into. And that's why I said earlier on, the value proposition to the Cisco partners are immense, because they can now take these environments, and instead of force feeding tools into a customer, it's like, hey, whatever your workflow is, we can build smart collaboration spaces and collaboration itself into your workflow instead of the other way around. Yeah. And that means you save a massive amount on training for the end user, because you're doing something in an environment they're already familiar with. And by the way, that's very alien in a lot of organizations where they may have multiple platforms. I know customers where they say, well, we use Microsoft for just doing messaging. We use Slack for team collaboration, and then we use GoToMeeting for web conferencing. And IT expects their users to be familiar with every single platform. And when they come out of their SAP or Oracle or their portal that they're working in all day long, they expect them to know which platform to choose and what to do and be an expert in all of that. Yeah. That, to me, is the wrong way of doing it. You want to build it into, if they sit inside of SAP or Oracle or their own portal, you want to build collaboration into that, which you can do with other platforms as well. What you can't then do is bring in the room environment into that also. So many of them work well as long as everybody's sitting on a laptop or a PC. But the moment that you have a group of people that are sitting in a conference room, then those things tend to fall apart. And I think that's really where Cisco has a unique advantage in covering all of those modalities, from workflow, mobile, desk, and the rooms themselves as well.
Yeah, and then ACA Engine can connect to third-party things to bring into this sort of cross-referencing. And that might be as simple as Office 365 to see people's schedule, to see what location they're in, and then to apply that to context of, well, these group of people are trying to organize a meeting. 3 of them are in Oslo, 2 of them are in Sydney. So we need a small room in Sydney, a slightly larger room in Oslo, and we need a video call between them. And that's where, if we can tie into other records of truth, such as Office 365 or whatever's doing the scheduling, just that one extra integration brings in all of these additional experiences, let alone the 5 or 6 other integrations we could probably scope and come up with new ideas on how to improve workflows and efficiencies, which is often, that workflow automation is often overlooked when everyone, again, coming back to the app, when everyone's focused on an app. Because if you can't see it, they don't scope it. So if you start thinking outside the app, you're like, oh, we can actually just automate all this workflow, and you don't need to use an app. So I think you're definitely on the same page there. How do you find that's reflected in Cisco generally? Is this because you're I hope this isn't just because you're sort of slightly new to Cisco and excited, and you're looking at this as an opportunity. Do you feel like Cisco broadly thinks the same as you and I?
So I think the answer is yes, in terms of there's a big focus on workplace transformation. And this is an element. I don't like the word workplace transformation because it's like managed service. It has a different meaning to different people.
Yeah.
So that's one of the reasons why I always focus on the workplace experience piece. Because if I drive a great experience on the workflow and the physical experience from a video, audio perspective, no matter what the environment is, I'm likely to be able to drive the best engagement. If I drive the best engagement, then that's going to help me attracting people, retaining. It's going to drive me agility. I'm going to get I can get a better efficient use of the real estate and optimize the workplace. I can do all of those things. What we've recently done as well at Cisco is we've got these industry groups, and one of them is a smart buildings industry group. Yeah. So, a lot of in all fairness as well, from a lot of the, how do you drive user behavior in an automated way, instead of just looking at the analytics and then trying to figure it out post, how do I affect the user real time? A lot of those things are relatively new from a technology perspective within the last year or so. So, or the reality of it is we can now actually do it with the technologies that we actually have, and that's wider across Cisco now than it ever has been.
Yeah, I think what I saw when I was at the hackathon recently, even simple things like different groups and departments and product managers at Cisco working with other product managers, because if that's good to see, because if they're siloed, there could be double handling in one way, or things that just don't work together as a solution. And for a little while, I was confused between what used to be called Cisco CMX and the functionality we could get from Meraki. But I can now see Cisco CMX as part of Cisco DNA Spaces, which is working very closely with Meraki, and they're complementary. They're not competing with each other. So it's not easy to achieve that in large organizations with a large product catalog. But it's good. I think what's driving this really is the adoption of open APIs. And a little while ago there wasn't that available to the market, and now it's this growth for both mentality that ISVs and channel partners can build their own solutions if you give the developers access to all the possible functions and let them come up with the ideas.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is specifically over the last 18 months, it's accelerated, and we just announced to the partners this last week, which is public now, is this single platform that we've been working towards. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. It was bespoke, and part of that is just the process of acquiring companies and what have you, and then putting them together. We're doing extremely well putting that together into a single platform where you've got messaging, meet, calling, devices, and contact center all on a single platform, but you can consume it in any which way that you want. So I think, a couple of 2-3 years ago, it was very much about, oh, well, we got to be cloud, and because everybody's being cloud. Now it's like, yeah, we are cloud, but we're also on-prem and we're also hybrid. Yep. So those customers that want to take one step at a time, we can absolutely do that. And there's things even on the contact center side where you could have an Avaya PBX at your local site, and you can actually connect it into the Cisco cloud through WebEx Edge. And then you could get common, voicemail and call routing and IVRs and everything else that could be common, even though you might not have Cisco actual sort of call control sitting at your actual buildings. Yeah. So it's that openness and that platform approach with devices and things into it that give a phenomenal experience that really, that allows us to do these things like smart buildings as well, and really start to make a difference to drive the outcomes that a customer is ultimately looking for.
Particularly smart buildings, it's quite important to have that on-prem or cloud as an option.
Yep.
In my experience, it's still the smart building, because it's a building, because it's tied to the building industry. it's very much a capital industry. So
That's exactly right.
they build something. They have a fund that they raise to fund everything. It's a capital budget. So if you come into a smart building with 5 or 6 cloud platforms that are OpEx, they just don't have a process. There is no process of spending their capital budget on an OpEx solution. So we have that flexibility now. It's easy for us because we're software, so it's we can just license it in an OpEx or a capital way. But a lot of people, I've seen other vendors miss opportunities because they only offered cloud. And that's something that anyone trying to get into smart buildings needs to consider. You can't force cloud onto the building industry. It's just the appetite for it isn't there yet.
Correct. That's absolutely right. Which is why if you have the models that we have at Cisco, then you give the customer the choice to start today and to do it with what makes the most sense for them as well. And some of them, they may have bought a call manager or a contact center on-prem, 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And they may say, hey, I've got a 5-year depreciation on this, so I can't get rid of it yet because I invested a huge amount then. So that's fine. But it doesn't mean that you then have to wait another 3 years before you can then start take advantage of some of the cloud things. You can do that today and have them both coexist.
It's definitely a hybrid, and particularly if you look at smart building as the building operators and the tenants. So like the workplace, they might run some solutions globally. So obviously that makes sense to be a cloud solution, but the tenant solution will be on-prem. So it's not easy, and it's again the going back to those challenges and gaps in the market. Not everyone gets it from the. It's not a technical challenge. It's understanding the landscape, and if you're not working in the landscape, you just don't know. So there's this is emerging and moving so quickly. It's catching up is part of the challenge.
Very quickly. Yeah. And I think one of the exciting things about having our own smart buildings industrial group is it does give us the ability also to start influencing at the architect and engineering and at the consultant level, and start to also influence the standards around that as well. ASHRAE obviously being one example of that, because the effect that we can have, I'll give you one specific example that is again, that's currently being worked on, and the impact it could have to users is CO2. So there's legislation that's coming in that says if you exceed a certain CO2 level in an area, then it's deemed to be unsafe to work in that. So, and in particular, if you think the impact of lots of people and organizations moving to huddle spaces, where they get a lot of small rooms. Sometimes they just have common air conditioning associated to the whole floor. And I have personally, and I'm sure you have as well, at different locations where you say, hey, can I just borrow your little huddle space or whatever to do a call before or after the meeting? And after 5 minutes, you're out of there because it's either boiling hot or freezing cold, because it just happens to be where they put the ducts. Well, once we just announced the Desk Pro that measures CO2. So we then have the ability during a call that, hey, if the CO2 level exceeds a certain threshold and your engine can power that, then it's either a signal to the BMS system, but if it's not possible because you have no individual VAV control there, then you can actually, again, using WebEx Assistant and pushing the messages to the display, say, hey, look, it's now unsafe to work in here, please, move out. Now, you could extend that to potentially a panel on the outside that typically would only be used for scheduling. You could extend that to say, for example, I'm going to turn that yellow when this room is unsafe to work in. Yeah. So now if I'm the tenant and I pay for certain services and I'm looking at my floor there, I'm seeing I've got 5 rooms that are showing yellow. Yeah, I'm paying to have air conditioning services there, but the supply isn't there to do it. Then I can go back to the owner of the building and say, hey, look, I'm paying for this. You're providing me with an unsafe area to go and work in. And typically it was never measured. So if you couldn't measure it, they'd get away with it. And the owner would never, or the tenants would never know. It's like, oh, there's a whole area that we can't use because it's either too hot or too cold. Now, if you bring in carbon dioxide levels into that as well, then it'll be like, okay, now I can start to impact how people, we've all been in those rooms where it gets stuffy, and what happens is you're not as productive because you start to just fall off the edge of the cliff. That's those types of things of how you can drive things are really valuable.
Safety is something we're starting to do a bit more of, and I guess it's not as like sexy as the other user experience stuff we do. So but it's now coming up as I said earlier, when we start looking at workflow automation, that's another area where we can trigger
Yep.
alerts and interfaces for security, people concerned with security. But this is a good segue into one of the questions I had penciled down to ask is the sort of the changing face of the customer. The CO2 thing for me is interesting. I hear it a lot from human resources. So when we go in and sell our solution, if it's a tenancy like a workplace, it's typically to a C-level IT person, someone that has workplace in their job title, maybe workplace experience manager or something like that, and there'll be someone from human resources, and they're sort of it comes up in almost every meeting now. How do we monitor air quality? Because
Yeah.
we know, or maybe there's been some research lately, or they've gone to a conference that if the air quality is low, people are less productive. They're sluggish,
Yep.
and then they start asking like, well, how do we monitor this and look and monitor the outcome of the employees? So, some of our customers are having ideas like, well, how many more coffees are they having when the air quality's low because they're feeling down and they need like a caffeine hit or something like that. And these are like the sort of things where like it might sound like a gimmick, but those experiences are really driving platform-based solutions because we can listen to those ideas and be like, yeah, we can do that, and then they can work out with us or with a consultant. Should we do that? Is that worth knowing? Is that worth cross-referencing? And it all comes down to like, what is the purpose and intent of this workplace?
But what I would add to that, John, is and we touched on a little bit earlier on, what you're talking about, and most customers then think is, great, I'm getting the analytics of what it is, I'm getting then the behavior of what people do. What I'm saying is if you put the Cisco WebEx devices in there, you have an ability to drive the user behavior in real time.
Yeah.
So rather than do the example that you have, which is the cause and effect, the cause is the air quality is bad. The effect is that people leave the meeting to go and have a coffee or to go and have a drink to get the hell out of there. That's not good.
Yeah.
That's not good. That's a huge productivity impact. So rather than doing that, is what can you do real time? If I'm measuring it real time and I know it's happening and I know I can't make a change because there's no physical air handling unit that's supplying that particular space that can do that, I can move the user. So in other words, before the user starts to feel the effects, I know it's already getting up there. So now I can say to the user, look, the air quality is getting low in this room. Let me move you to this other room that's available here, and I'll transfer the call across there. Would you like to do that, yes or no? And if they say yes, and then when they come out of that room is shut down until the air quality goes back to a safe temperature. And I think what people are so focused often on the analytics, but the user doesn't care about the analytics. The analytics are done post. Very valuable. It doesn't impact the user. It's really valuable for the IT manager or the facilities manager or HR, but it doesn't help the user in real time. And I think that's the excitement that we now have the possibility to drive the user in real time. A simple example there would be as well, if you have a conference room that can hold 20 and 2 people are using it. Happens all the time. You don't know. I mean, you might say, great, the conference room is being used, but you don't know that it's being way underutilized. Well, again, if I know and I have a people count on the device that says I got 2 people in here, then I can say to those 2 people, hey, by the way, there's another room further along that seats 4 people. Would you like me to move this call? And if they say no, you record that. So they made a choice, and maybe you have the right to go and do that, but at least you're giving them an option. The moment that they realize that's being then tracked, because, of course, the moment I ask the question, they realize, oh, somebody knows there's only 2 of us in here. There's probably an 80% probability that those users are going to say, yes, I'll move. Yep. Because once they know the question's being asked, they know it's being tracked. Yep. So now they know they're not, and you could take that down to the energy level as well. So you can take the guilt aspect from that to say, hey, it's going to cost X amount of dollars more to condition this room compared to the small space that we could put you in. So now you have a lot of the IWMS systems have that ability as well, where they can cost out what the energy consumption is on a per room basis and then feed back in so the user can make a real-time choice.
I mean,
and you can
you
guide
could
them
even
into making the right decisions.
you could even have a logic trigger that if the room is underutilized, uh, they can stay there, but we turn everything off. We turn off the air conditioning. We save energy consumption unless
That's
enough
right.
people are in the room to be over the threshold. So yeah, I mean, I could completely agree with data is much more powerful if it's being used as an input to a user experience and to drive
Yeah,
change. And even the data you're collecting long term as analytics can recognize patterns and then again go back
yes,
into the system to be better at that context that we were talking about earlier. So if we're collecting long-term data, we see patterns at certain times of the day in certain spaces, we can then take better educated guesses about what to do in that space at that time.
absolutely, absolutely.
And that's not AI. That's just logic, and that's something we can achieve like right now. And a lot of people say
Yeah,
things like that as, oh, that's smart building AI. I'm like, well, no, there's a misconception of what AI actually is. And AI, like many things, you should use it if you need it. But if you don't need it, logic is much more resource available. So if you want to run AI,
yeah.
that's you're going to need a whole service to do so, and that's expensive and will take time. Yeah.
Yes, and the example that I typically give in that as well, because I say exactly the same thing. I drop the A out of AI, and is one where let's say there's four of you sitting in a conference room. You're having a video meeting, and then you want to extend it, and you ask the system, "Hey, can I extend this meeting?" And then it says, "No, you can't, but I can find another room for you." One of the ways of finding the other room is to go back to the facilities management scheduling system there and say, okay, what rooms do I have available that can seat four people and aren't scheduled? Okay, I've got these four rooms available. Let me look inside of them. Wow, three of them have squatters in them. I will intelligently send you to the fourth room that is not scheduled and doesn't have any squatters. There's no
Yeah.
A in that I. It's just the I piece. I'm going to intelligently go and schedule it there.
Yeah.
And then the exciting thing of that is when you start to integrate it into the fabric of the building and the energy consumption of the building, and then you tie that into what's happening in the outside world. We're currently on opposite sides of the world. So for you, it's in the morning. I can see the sun is blazing through, and you've got the shades over there. For
Yeah.
me, it's dark and it's cold outside, so it doesn't matter. But if you're in an office building there, and it's in the morning, and it's a summer's day, and the sun is shining, if I want to move you, I prefer to put you on the west side or the north side of the building first, because that's going to be far more energy efficient, because I don't have to cool it so much. So then there's those types of things that you can do so that you can then vary every room to go from a energy saving mode to a comfort mode. And I can react that either based on schedule or based on real time. If I have a very tightly controlled huddle space, and if I don't oversize it, which typically you don't want to do in terms of the air conditioning and the airflow, I know that if I have four people come into that room for a meeting instantaneously, ad hoc, then I know that if by the time the temperature starts to increase, it's already too late. It's going to take X amount of time for me to be able to drop that temperature back into the comfort mode. But if I know straight away, four people have come into this room, and I tell the building management system that, it can try and control it straight away and not wait for the temperature to rise beyond its spec first before it drives in the extra volume there. So that the energy efficiency that will drive from that is significant, and then the comfort is significant as well. So now you go back to the well-being of the people inside of there. It affects the well-being of the people in there. I mean, that's, again, a lot of that, as you can see, I'm pretty psyched about as to the impact that can have on users.
And I think the challenge when we take this back to customers or channel partners is that what you and I right now are scoping ideas based on logic. I mean, it's almost the definition of an algorithm. If this is the condition, then this is the action. But in the real world, it's hard to convince people to scope their user requirements that way. So they're mostly looking at it as, what buttons do I need? And this, I guess, this is the theme of our conversation. I didn't expect to talk about so often, but if we can move towards more logic-based user scoping than visual-based, graphic wireframes, etc., every building, every project will be so much smarter than it is currently, because yeah, you and I can have all these ideas, but then they get watered down through the channels, and I think that's a bit of a challenge right now.
Yeah, and I think part of that reason, John, is you've got to go back and figure out what are the outcomes that I'm trying to achieve, which has nothing to do with the technology. So if your outcomes are, I want to attract people to work here, it's a great place to work. I want to retain the people that I have. I want my teams to be agile. I want to use my real estate efficiently. I want to optimize my workplaces. I want to do all of that securely. Then if those are the outcomes that you're looking for, then what are some of the key things that will help drive that? And a lot of that is around having your people engaged. So if you have people that are engaged, it's proven that's like, okay, then you're going to be able to achieve some of those outcomes. Then you've got to ask yourself, well, how do you improve that engagement? Well, if you give a great user experience in all the environments that they're sitting in, whether it's a conference room, a huddle room, their desk or whatever, that allows them to effectively collaborate, they're going to achieve those outcomes that you're looking for. The challenge then is you need to have what is your best engagement? And that's a mix of that physical experience, which is it great audio, video, automatic camera tracking, all those sort of things that you would get from a Cisco device, plus the workflow experiences that we talked about that's integrated into their workflows and into their environment so they don't have to come out and do different things. And part of that workflow experience is also, what happens during the meetings. We talk a lot about cognitive collaboration at Cisco in terms of the things which can mean different things to different people as well. But I can get information on you when we're in a meeting. So if I'm not familiar with everybody that's in there, it can give me information. It's all opt-in, it's all secure. It's those types of things that are in there as well. We just bought a company, Voicea, that does real-time transcriptions that can also then actually drive actions. So again, open platform. So if I say, okay, great, well, we'll schedule that meeting for 10 o'clock next Wednesday morning, it goes, oh, that's an action item. I will go and do that, and I'll automatically schedule it. It can take notes and all those sort of things. So there's all these pieces that play as part of the experience to drive the engagement that drives your attracting and retention capabilities. Because I have customers who say, hey, look, we're best of breed. We have all these different platforms in there, and we just expect our users to do everything. Well, best of breed doesn't mean you're going to get the best experience that drives your optimum engagement at the user level. Each platform on its own might be great, but if you don't tie them all together in a way that makes it seamless and frictionless for the users, they're not going to want to be engaged, and you won't achieve those business outcomes.
And even if there's some crossover between platforms and systems, that's fine, because at least then we know there's no gaps. And if we have multiple systems in place or platforms in place, and there's some crossover between what vendor A does compared to vendor B, that's fine, as long as there's no gaps in the middle. So I think a lot of vendors are getting better at that as well, to make all of these user experiences possible. If we can now have the assumption, or whatever we're connected to, we can talk to. And whatever feature that thing does, it's available to us as an API. So if it's got context-aware voice, then it's safe to assume, we can tie into that. Yeah. So look, I think this has been a good conversation. I've glanced at my notes. I think we've covered everything conversationally that we had written down as questions here. Is there anything you want to cover before we end this episode?
No, I think I think where we are going from an industry perspective and the things that we can do that really affect the users, I think it's just tremendous. Now we have some headwinds in terms of, from a video conferencing perspective. People always looked at it and said, "Oh, I just need video conferencing, check," and they don't take into account all the other aspects. Which is why I often say, "Hey, think of the Cisco devices as your iPhone. It's a great interface, but it's the applications and integrations that we can do into the building and things, and how you can interface, that really make it a smart collaboration device. And that's what's going to drive the user behavior. It's not just a system where you can just make calls. We saw how the telephone went from a telephone into a smart device, and the value that's driven. I'm super excited. I think that video collaboration piece that traditionally was thought of as just video conferencing with what we can do now is going to help drive that as well, where people say, yeah, I just don't have a I need to have a smart collaboration device in there, because just video on its own doesn't isn't valuable enough when I can get all of these other things to improve the environment and to be able to do what I want to do, which is attract, retain, and have agile workforces.
And I think it's exciting to use WebEx products and technologies for things that have nothing to do with video conferencing. And
yes.
And at the very least, that means if there's, particularly for meeting rooms, and there's already WebEx technology, we can repurpose it for other things that have nothing to do with video conferencing. So you don't have to actively be having a call with someone to get the benefit out of that gear.
Absolutely.
So maybe it's as simple as counting people in the room, but everything we discussed today is where we can take it. And we're having ideas in real time, and there's so many more ideas we could come up with. And it's not really up to us; it's up to the customers and up to our partners to come up with those ideas. So I hope we planted a seed today with a few of them. They're obviously common things we're thinking of, but I'm excited to see what others come up with.
Yeah, me too. Well, again, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Yeah, we'll end it there.